My intent is to share my disassembly experience that might, and some good tips so that you can gain confidence and you might want to dive into this on your own with your own hand car or others. I've worked on owners' hand cars over several years in a wide variety of conditions, including one of mine, which was purchased, was in better condition, but I still rebuilt it. The other one was a junk box retrieval, and it was in pretty poor condition. As a matter of fact, as I recall, the chassis was separated from the body. They're not that difficult to disassemble, but you have to get used to the miniaturization of these. You have to get used to working with a little bit smaller components and motors, but they're very similar. There are some key contactor assembly points. I'm going to point those out. The 742s, excuse me, are going to be a little bit more challenging, if for no other reason, because of the reversing rod. It's not a slam dunk just to go yank those reversing rods out, but it's not impossible either. And once you tinker with it a little bit, you'll see how it's assembled, and you'll be able to get it free. So they're similar to diesel motors, and we're going to look at that in detail when we see the slides of 740 disassembled. And one more point, there's no pull more tires on these, of course, that you have to deal with or have to work around when you're cleaning things with things like degreasers. You don't have to worry about that. All four wheels are, in fact, contact wheels. The key contact points or disassembly points are the same for a 740, 740A, or a 742. Doesn't really matter. They all have the same ones, top and bottom. Now, the one that I call the plus one, 4 plus 1, and that plus 1 is the reversing rod mechanism for the reverse rod. That you'll have to deal with as a disassembly point on the 742, because you see the reversing rod goes through a hole right here in the body. So there's no way you can just pull the rod out all the way. It's going to have to stay in there because you can't do that. Now, I believe that what I did was, when I disassembled this, is that I was able to free it up such that I can pull the rod down far enough to free it from one of the holes, and thus that frees the body from the chassis. All right, the 4 key contact points. The first one that I work on is right here, or here would be a good place to look at it, and that is to separate the hands from the pump bar. I do that by inserting a real sharp, small, flat-bladed screwdriver right there in that little slot and twisting it just a little bit to get those separated horizontally or laterally before I try to move it up vertically. Once I get that little bit of separation, I'm able to get some really small needle nose pliers in there and bring one of them up or one of them down. Be careful. You do not want to break off either of those tabs, because that's what's going to hold the man's hands or arms to the pump rod, and you've got to have that. Now, in removing it, be careful not to sever the hands. The arms on these replacement or reproduction men are longer than they are on the originals because they've been snipped off over time. These men were on the 740A, and I replaced them mainly because their arms were too short. I was having to put the pump bar up their arms because the hands were literally missing, and that makes the motor have to work even harder to pull the men forward or push it back. Although these men are more flexible and they're a little bit smaller, you can see the size difference between originals and these reproductions. The reproductions are a little bit more stout and rigid than the originals and aren't quite as flexible, so the motor has to work a little bit harder. Now, once I get that slot opened up, I can then slide the arms out like this, or the hands out right at the wrist, and they're free. You just don't want to do something so drastic that it snips those hands off. That is the convenient part of these reproductions, that their arms are at the right length, and you're good to go with them. So be careful with the arms not to shorten them. The next thing I do is I disassemble the link and gear assembly, which is right here, away from the pump bar. Now on this one, the pump bar is down on the lever end, which means I don't have a whole lot of room to work with to move this bar in and out to pull it off of that tab. So what I do is I touch the non-gear axle, just the non-gear axle, to a live track section and rotate it just enough until I get the pump bar in a position such that, orientation such that the lever is up, the link is up as high as it'll go. Now I have a little bit of flexibility. I can pull that lever back just a little bit and bend it and get it off of that tab right there. But don't break the tab. Just be careful in pulling that back. Once that's done, the pump bar and the men are free from the body. The next thing I do is release the men. Now the men are held down by screws. Glue won't work. I rebuilt one for just within the last month for someone, and it looks like over time that when one of these men became, for whatever reason, detached from the body, the owner attempted to glue them back down, and that is not going to work. There's a lot of force put on the men during the operation, and they have to be very secure to the body. So what I do is, once I get the gear mechanism separated from the pump bar, I can then, and the hands as well, I can then simply hold the body and pull gently back on the man and insert a screwdriver down between his feet, and then twist that screw and get it off and get the man off. Just don't strip those screws. They're very critical for holding the men on that can withstand the tension. One more thing about being careful with the arm length of these men is that you'll notice on this one, as the pump bar is down, you'll notice the man bends from his shoulders down. On this one, when the pump bar is up, he's leaning back just a little bit, but a lot of that is taken out by the fact that his arms are long enough. If you shorten the arms, what it starts doing is having to pull the man down in order for it to be able to go through the full cycle of rotation. Same thing here, it has to almost lift the man up and bend him at the same time. I've noticed differences in performance when the hands are attached properly versus when they're not, as which they were here. The motor simply had to work harder to pull the man down when the pump bar was down like this, and then push him back up, and then pull up on his arms like that when the pump bar was going in the upward motion. So it's, again, that's why it's important to maintain those hands or arms at the right length.